Hello, hockey friends and families around the world. Welcome to another edition of Our Kids Play Hockey. Special interview edition today. I want to introduce you to someone. We're joined today by a New York Times bestselling author, journalist, and screenplay writer. In addition to being an award-winning author, he is also a contributing editor at Vanity Fair and Rolling Stone, and his work has appeared in The New Yorker, Harper's Magazine, and Best American Essays. His literary works have made him one of the most prolific authors in the country. Please help us welcome Rich Cohen to the show today. And of course, if this was a real studio, there'd be an audience with the applause sign on. You can all hear it, I guess. Rich's newest book, Pee Wee Confessions of a Hockey Parent, deep dives into a season as a hockey parent while observing his son, Micah, one of his four boys, as they journey through a time period that many of us would often describe as tumultuous. It's a book about the love of the game, the love of parents for their children, and the triumphs and struggles of both. Rich, first off, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for giving us some time today and being here.
Thanks for having me. Very happy to be on your show.
So my first question for you is this. I'm sure you've been asked many, many times, why did you write this book? And I know from experience that writers tend to write, right? You write what you see. But to do that, there needs to be a spark or something of interest to motivate a full literary work. So my question's not why, but what was the moment that sparked you into writing a whole book about a Pee Wee season?
I think there was two things. One is once I got into this, and I played as a kid and I was completely oblivious to what the parents were doing, and my parents weren't involved. They didn't care, But once I got into it and found myself so intensely caring about it, I'm usually really caring about one thing at a time, and I was caring about this more than anything. And I have four kids, so I was like kind of neglecting my other kids, I felt like. And I kind of wish that there was like a book or a guide or a movie or something I could turn to like tell me that my experience was somehow universal and I wasn't crazy and what I was going through, and I couldn't find it, honestly. And when that has happened a few times in my life, when I wanted something, it hasn't existed, and I decided I can't find it, I should write it. And the other thing is I was at Brewster hockey rink watching my kid go through a clinic or something, and I was like glued to the glass, and I was talking to a friend of mine who's a writer, and I was just going on and on and on about all the different things, and he's like, man, you sound nuts. And then I realized, like, yeah, man, I am nuts. This is like, and then this is just like so intense for me. And usually when I have an experience that's like I really get into, I usually find that that's the best material to write about because you care about it so much. And I'm a completely ordinary person. So I found in my life, I'm 52 now, that if I really care about something and feel something, then that is shared by millions of other people. So there's other people that have the same thing that I have and would probably benefit from a book.
I love that. It's a phenomenal answer. And I think more people need to take that approach with not just writing, but art in general, right? What's cool about our show here, Rich, is this. So you have a hockey coach on with us today, level 5 in Mike Benelli right there. Christie is a devoted hockey parent as well. I'm somewhere in the middle of all of that. My son's an Atom, so my son's just starting to play hockey. Full disclosure, Mike has read your book. I have not. I don't believe Christy has either. And that's only just because of the time we had set up to do this episode. And I actually like that because we each bring a different perspective to this interview, right? So I do want to throw it to Mike because Mike's got some burning questions that he has to ask you right off the bat. So Mike, why don't you jump into it?
Yeah, well, first of all, Rich, I really appreciate that you wrote the book. I'm sure it was, it wasn't probably the easiest thing, based off of how you wrote it. And I think as people read the book, as I did, start reflecting upon, oh, wow, I've done that, or, oh, geez, I know so many people that have done that. And I think, one of the things like for me that, other than, I think I even mentioned this too, to the other group, that other than it making me really sad to read it, and then mad, just like, Jesus, like, are we, and I say from a hockey perspective, from a coaching perspective, and from a parent perspective, are we missing so many things and red flags and all of these things that you bring up and you bring up in your book that people will see, that there's so much at fault from the hockey community that really we need to address, right? So I guess, one of the questions I had for you was just based off of how you wrote the book and how you found yourself feeling. Do you really think that there's, what are the pieces in this book as you wrote that you feel we as a hockey community, need to change? I mean, is this something you think is just in your community and maybe in a couple of pocket of communities, or is this systemic across the youth hockey world?
I think it's systemic across the whole society. So I don't think hockey's unique. My older son's applying to college right now, and I have many of the same feelings about everybody's trying to get the best for their kid, kind of, and acting like the rest of the community isn't there. Like we all kind of rise up together. And I think everything from when I was born in 1968, I grew up in the 70s and 80s. Everything seemed kind of less important now. Everything seems so competitive and so important. And there's such a fear of being left behind, you know, and you see that in the news, like which group does what. It's like, seems like the people are fighting over a, you know, a piece of pie that is just going to stay the same size. Whereas the idea is like hockey was infinite and there's room for everybody. And so that, I don't think it's just hockey, but I do think it's all over hockey. Like it's all over everywhere. And at first I thought it was just unique to my experience, but then especially as I started talking to people, and since this book has come out, I've heard from so many people. And I think it's almost like one of the big problems is, and it's everybody everywhere, is everybody for their kids and for their kids more than themselves is so focused on the future. Like, where's my kid going to be next year? What team's he going to be on next year? That stress starts in the middle of the season. And the fact is, one big change in hockey from when I was a kid is we had our tryouts in the fall. So you ended the season with your team, and then you went away for a while, and then you came back. And a lot happens over the summer, you know? But now the tryouts are in the spring. So kind of what happens is as you get near the end of the season, everybody stops focusing a little bit on the team and starts focusing on the tryouts. Right. And the team sort of falls apart as everybody's like, this kid's gone from my kid's teammates to my kid's competition, and there's only going to be 2 spots, and who will get it, and who's getting more points, and who's blah, 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 blah. And all that comes in. And I think it's all over not just all over hockey. I think it's all over the whole society. So I just think that, yeah, because of that, you're missing what's happening now, because it's happening now, man. Like I could say as somebody who peaked as a hockey player around age 10 or 11, okay, and has steadily gotten worse. Okay, so like the 11-year-old me is better than the 52-year-old me in hockey. That for most of these kids, and for my kid, this is their hockey career, and this is what they're going to remember. It's happening now.
I did see a little bit of what you're talking about. And that's the cool thing about your book, is I think we can all see a little bit of ourselves in your book, and even to the extent of the craziness. Okay, we've all been there. And you can't help it. Sometimes you just get so drawn in, and everyone around you is that way too. And then, you know, that the environment, it just lends itself to that obsessiveness. But I did see a little bit of what you're talking about in the college recruiting process, as my daughter was, you know, getting recruited by college coaches. Some parents were so secretive about what college coach was open to seeing kids and who they're applying to. I was so open about it. I even shared letters of, hey, this is the kind of letter you should be writing to coaches. This works. How do I know that? Because I ask coaches, this is what they're looking for. I'd pass out letters if your kid is stuck on how to apply to a college coach. But other parents were so secretive. They didn't want to let you in on what they were discovering. Right. It was crazy. It's like, what is the big secret? I'm not your competition. Trust me.
Right. And the flip side of it is, it's just the good part, you know, we live in a hyper competitive society. It's what's made America great. But the flip side of it is it runs a little amok. And the fact is, probably Coach Benelli could tell us, if a player is really great, it's going to work out fine for that player. I mean, they're going to find their level and everything's going to be fine. And you can't really, you know, sort of keep one kid out so your kid goes up, and you see it all over the place. And for me, like, a big realization was with my older son when he played, where he couldn't master a few things. And I said, I'm having trouble with this. What can I do for him? He's like, I don't know. And finally I decided to take him to like a private lesson. And I went over to another rink, not a regular rink. And all the parents I had asked what to do were over there with their kids getting private lessons. Right. And by the way, I'm equally to blame. I didn't say, hey, you guys, you should go over. I'm like, right. Okay, now I'm in on it. You know, now I know that I have to like do this extra thing that I wasn't.
So you got there and you find out that everybody had the secret, you know, to better trading.
Which, if I had thought about it, of course, the key is practicing more. But I had just, you know, I changed so much from when I was a kid. I was so oblivious. And, you know, I always think probably if you could do a study about which kids do better in sports is probably the second or third kid, because you used to use your first kid to experiment and understand the lay of the land.
That's a great point.
Yeah, you need the families of 6 kids. You know, they always end up that
Right.
they finally did it. You know,
Right. And in the 6 kids, there's always a goalie for some reason. You know,
Yeah.
I'll tell you, Rich. I had a unique upbringing in the sport. Actually, my first year playing was Pee Wee. And started, club hockey at 12. And I had a different team every single year, not by choice so much. It was I advanced at a rate that I was playing on a different team. So I had this very unique experience where I didn't really have long-term teammates. We're talking back in the 90s. What I do remember, and this is something I want to tap on that you brought up, is the focusing on the now, focusing on the moment, which, as all of us know here, it's not just a hockey saying. That is a life lesson. That is a way to live your life. The thing that I remember about growing up, and I want to get your thoughts on this because I know you have this as well, was being in the car with my dad driving to games, because in those experiences, in those times, he bestowed so much wisdom upon me about life lessons. You know, what happens when you get knocked down, not making a team. Those are the real valuable times that I remember. And again, I played at a very high level. I got to semi-professional hockey, right? So the reason I'm bringing that up is that I don't remember my Pee Wee games. I remember being with my dad. And I think that a lot of parents get so lost sometimes in what you just said about not being in the moment. And maybe they're bestowing their own dreams onto their children, which is not really fair to the kids, right? So the question that I'm asking is that, did you have that with your parents? Did you have moments like that with Micah in the season and your other kids? Is that the real value of it? Because again, look, there's nothing wrong with having a dream. There's nothing wrong with wanting your kid or your kid wanting to go pro, but there are larger things in life than that. And as you just alluded to asking Mike, if your kid is that good, they'll be picked out pretty early on in the process. And otherwise they just have to work really hard. So again, I'm talking a lot, but for me, in my youth hockey experience, by far the biggest value was the time with my father in which he was bestowing wisdom, and my mother too. I don't want to leave her out of that. Is that something that you felt was missing? Is that something that you felt was redeemed this season in your experience with your son?
Well, I have a thing like where I say in the book, where even when it's bad, it's good,
Right.
So that stuff that you're talking about is the stuff. And that's why we ultimately do it, unless you're the 0.001%. You do it for the time you have with your kid. And that stuff can't be, it's fathers and sons, mothers and sons, whatever, mothers and daughters. It can't be ruined and it can't be taken away. So even in seasons that you have good seasons, you have bad seasons, but that's always a thing. And it's always a thing that you remember. Right. I didn't really have it with my father because my father grew up in Brooklyn. He's a basketball guy. He's one of the reasons why I didn't want to play, why I played hockey, because he didn't know a thing about it, because he was a harsh coach. My brother played basketball. My dad tied his right arm behind his back for like a week. He had to only use it. He'd do stuff like that to him. So I didn't want my father involved. So hockey was perfect because he didn't have anything to say. But with my son, absolutely. When I think back on his hockey career so far, I think of picking him up early from East Ridge Middle School in Ridgefield and driving him to Lake Placid and stopping to eat along the way and getting off the highway and going up the mountain, feel like you're going into like Wonderland, and how, it's just great. And if you ask him, what's the best moment of your hockey career, including, winning tournaments, winning this and that, he will say the thing he likes, the thing he remembers and had the most fun of is eating the buffet breakfast at the hotels with all of his friends and his teammates, and sitting with the teammates, and
camaraderie.
And that's why he loves it, and he loves it, so he keeps playing. And I agree with you. That's why we do it, and that's all you'll remember. And even for the pros, by the way, I read this book about Derek Bugard, which is sort of this horrible book, about what happened to him. But he talks in the book, this John Branch book, about how what he remembered most was driving to tournaments, long drives with his father across Canada, not any of his stuff from his career.
Right. And, I got to say too, just to follow up on that, that's the rub, right? Like we lose sight of that too much as parents sometimes. I will follow up on this in a minute, but I got to let you know, Rich, to let you know how good of a writer you are, which again, you don't need to hear any more of, but you're a great writer. But this is what's funny about the prep for this show. Most weeks when we prep for this show, I'll talk to Christie and Mike and I'll say, hey, here's the topic and we'll have a 5 minutes conversation. Yeah, we'll do that. For this show, I got 2 very long emails from Mike, a 45-minute conversation all about your book, which I thought was fascinating. I'm like, wow, this really, 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 got through to Mike. So Mike's got some great questions here about some specific things that happen in the book. some tough situations, right, Mike? And I wanted to give you a chance to jump into that. But I had to tell you that, Rich, that the prep for this episode was deeper than most episodes that we've done.
Well, I don't know if it because it hit home, because I've been guilty of a lot of these things. Like, right. I think I wouldn't be in the position I'm in now and able to continue to coach if I think this was me, right? But there are pieces of this that I think a lot of us as parent coaches, like for instance, I'm a whole different coach now with a son and going through now years and years and years of coaching my own kids that I was prior to kids. So I would look back at, and you mentioned it in the book a lot about that relationship between the parent coach and the we all say in our youth hockey, the professional coach, right? Now, is he a professional coach? Well, he's a paid coach. That's not a parent. I'm not sure if he's a professional coach. Right. And I think, so some of the things, and I look at, what you mentioned earlier about that experience and the driving up to Lake Placid and all those things that we, most of us have done as youth hockey parents, especially on the East Coast, those aspects that I think that those memories happen even for the ones that win World Juniors, even for the ones that are in tier 1 or tier 4. It's the same experience for those kids. So, one of the things that struck me was, and I took a couple of these quotes here, and one of the things that really hit me was the quote where you have, I believe it was one of the parent coaches about Duffy keeping your effing stick down. This ain't a prison yard. And Tommy, we all know you can skate. How about playing hockey? And the derogatory, and then his own daughter, right? The parent coach's daughter. Hey, Jenny, what the hell are you trying to embarrass me? And I hear that all the time. And I guess my question to you, Rich, is being now that you've been in a lot of different youth hockey scenarios with many different coaches, do you think parents today accept that because they think that that's the type of coach that's going to bring their kids to another level, or they accept it because they don't know where the off ramp is on that? I mean, you kind of took an off ramp by exploding this, right? Like saying, oh, well, I guess that's how that parent feels. But right. So I know, for me, I'm going to make sure, the first thing I'm going to ask my parents when I pick a team is, are any of you writers? Number one. Right? And then, okay, let's eliminate that group. Or any of you podcasters.
There's a non-disclosure agreement, right?
Let me know. Are you an accountant? Yes. And you don't write? Perfect. That's what I'm going to pick. But I think, where do you think that is? Why is that allowed? I'm sure if your math teacher in your son's school or your phys ed teacher was ever accused of any of the stuff that you wrote in the book, right, you would yank that person would be fired the next day. Right. So why is that acceptable? And why is that in the culture of, forget about just hockey? Because I hear it in all youth sports. I hear it on the lacrosse field. I hear it on the baseball diamond. Why do you think we as parents accept that type of behavior by other parents and professional coaches?
Well, I would say for the most part, I found that the professional coaches were great, but and when they come up against the parent coaches, there's in certain situations like ours, there's a parent board. So the parent coaches sort of are the bosses. So you have a conflict of interest, kind of like you wouldn't allow where, you have board members making decisions and then parent coaches making decisions, and there's all kinds of conflicts of interest. And the thing they say about conflicts of interest is even if it's not really happening, the appearance, you really understand what the appearance of a conflict is a problem, because people will think it's unfair, even if it is fair, And second of all, the other problem with people, so the problem I would say was more with the parent coaches. And the problem with that is, first of all, there's like a whole coarsening of everything in society, and it just works its way into the rink. And we don't even think about it. Like, my wife the other day quoted when Bart Simpson, I was a huge Simpsons fan when it first came out, said, "Eat my shorts." And Bill Bennett got all mad and said, "This is the beginning of the end." And we all laughed at him. Maybe he was right. There's certain things you just didn't say out loud. I mean, you didn't use certain words out loud. Parents didn't call other kids or anybody by curse words in public. I mean, it was so, and that's just everywhere. And that just comes into the rink. Why would the rink be different than the whole rest of the world? And then the other thing is, I always say this, is like, you cannot see your own kid objectively. And it's not a criticism of anybody. It's just a fact, man. Like, and I always say there's two kinds of parents: those who look at their kids and they think they're the best hockey player in the world and you can never convince them otherwise, and those who look at their kids and think they're the worst hockey player in the world and no one can convince them otherwise. And the truth is they're probably, you know, somewhere in the middle, because that's where most of us are. And statistically, that's where they're going to be. So you get this weird thing where you have people with their own dreams and people with their own parenting styles are now in charge of everybody else's kids, and nobody says anything because, one, they don't want their kid to get punished for what they say, and they don't want their kids to make a team for what they, not to make a team for what they say, or to get ostracized from the program. And the feeling is usually, like in school it happens, maybe school's a little different, which is, this situation isn't great. I'll say a couple things and see if there's, you know, people are open to it. And if not, the year's going to end. And then next year will be better, you know? And then a lot of people leave the program and they leave hockey. And that's important because hockey's in competition with all these other sports. It's in competition with lacrosse. We had a kid leave our team, play lacrosse, never wasn't going to play hockey anymore after this, you know? So, or they go to, there's so many competing places you can go. You can just go, okay, so next year I'll go to Bedford and play for the Bedford team or whatever. I'll go to Brewster. And that's another thing that's sort of so different from my own time, which is we had AA and A, and you kind of went by age. The A team was almost entirely the kids who were younger, and the AA team was the kids who were older, except for the rare exception who would play up or play down. And otherwise we stayed together year after year after year. And you had this long-term friendship. And now again, like everything else, it's more like pros where people are like free agents. And after the season's like, where's Canseco going to go next year? I don't know. Maybe he's going to go to, you know, to the Marlins or something. So it's all that is in the ring. So I wouldn't say that. I think the hockey's better than it's ever been. My kid's much better than I ever was. These kids are all better than everybody I ever played with. So as far as making better hockey players, it's been a huge success. But for the experience part and the parents part, it's just become more like the rest of the world, and that everybody's sort of fighting for their position.
You know, Christie, I got to lean on your experience here with this topic as well. So, which I don't know if you know this, Christie is a prominent anchor in Syracuse, New York. Both of her kids played hockey. Her daughter plays college hockey. You know, Christie, you know, you're a strong woman, right? You've had to deal with this type of adversity your entire life, much more than all of us. So I think I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you for your thoughts on this and your experience with this as a woman who's had to deal with that derogatory language forever, right? You know, maybe there's something you can teach, not just the men here, you know, the parents in general, because, you know, women have to deal with this on such a level that I don't think men really, frankly, understand. And Rich and Mike, there's nothing to do with anything that you said. I think there's experience here that we can all learn from.
You know, it reminds me of a funny story. Don Lucia, University of Minnesota head hockey coach, was on a banquet circuit, and he'd open up his speech and say, I have the best job in hockey. I have the absolute best job. And then he'd correct himself and say, no, actually, I have the second best job. The first best job is a hockey coach at an orphanage, no parents to deal with. And of course, he'd bring the house down. You know what I mean? You laugh, yeah. But he raises a point. I think that parents have to tone it down, obviously. Remember, there is no perfect hockey parent. We're all just faking it. We're kind of like learning as we go along. And if somebody tells you the perfect parent, they're lying. They're absolutely lying. But I think you have to remember that we need to step out of the way and let our kids become that amazing person that they already are, and stop being those. I don't think they call them helicopter parents anymore. I think they call them snowplow parents.
Right.
Because they're trying to pave the way and make everything perfect for them. It's okay to let them make mistakes. If they fail, they're going to learn from that. And you've got to step back as a parent and just let it happen and be less hands-on, and be like the way our parents were. I know, you know, our parents used to just drop us off, and then they'd ask us later on, hey, how was the game? You know?
And they didn't really care that much when they asked.
Exactly.
Right. Oh, you survived? That's great.
I mean,
good. You get hurt? No, okay.
You know, so my father has this expression, and I have it at the beginning of the book, and it's the key, which is, he said, the secret to life is to care, but not that much.
Right.
And it's like about detachment. And by the way, Mike said that he identified various things he did that weren't wrong. I'm like probably in the book, like one of the main offenders as far as bad behavior. I realize that, like, I'm not holding myself up as a good hockey parent. I'm like, you know, the worst part about me is I know what I shouldn't do, but I do it anyway. You know, I can't help it. And I was thinking about, you know, the 24-hour rule where you wait 24 hours, which I broke various times knowing. I think that's a whole good rule for life in general, like as far as responding to anything, because you got to calm down. There's a great expression that you got to wait for the dirt to settle to see through the water. Right. It's all murked up. You can't think clearly. So I think that all that is so completely dead on. And it's just a question of like being detached a little bit and realizing a little bit of perspective and taking yourself out of the situation.
You know, we were joking before the episode, Mike and I, how the Rangers and the Islanders traded wins and how people are already calling for the heads of people on the team and say, just give it a moment. Let these guys figure it out. But Rich, I want to tell you this quick story too. And for our viewers and listeners out there, you know, what's funny is I've played in front of thousands of people. I've coached in front of tens of thousands of people. And my son is 7 years old and he's an Adam, as I said before the show. And I remember when I was getting into the season, initially, I didn't want to coach at all. I just wanted my son to be coached by somebody else because I typically coach at the higher levels. But when the pandemic hit, the only way I could even be around him was to volunteer. So I volunteered to coach. And we're sitting on the bench in the first game. And I remember, like, I've been preparing for this for a long time, dealing with parents. Like, I'm not going to be that parent, right? And I remember he started playing. And I'm proud of myself because I held back, but man, it bubbled up in my chest. I felt it all. I was like, oh my, you know, you got to score everything, all the anxiety that I had trained myself not to feel, I was feeling. And this is where I'm going with this, because I learned a lot in that moment. One was that just no one, as you all said, no one can escape that, right? It's your kid. You can't not look at it that way, right? And I was really surprised. And again, I had enough kind of clairvoyancy to kind of bury it down and not say much, right? And I feel like I did a good job, but I felt it. And I realized in that moment, and this is leading to my question, I realized in that moment that this entire journey is not just going to be a learning experience for my son. It's going to be a learning experience for me as well. I have this saying, I've said it on the show many times, that good coaches, you could probably apply this to parents, good coaches think they know everything and great coaches know they know nothing.
Yeah.
Right. And I took that approach of I'm going to learn a lot and I need to make myself vulnerable to learn that. So that leads to my question. What is the greatest life lesson so far that you think your son has learned, and more importantly, that you have learned as a parent? And you started to allude to that a few minutes ago, and that's why I'm asking it. Now, it could be more than one thing, but right. I was flabbergasted at the way I reacted to that. It's like, wow, this is a lot of anxiety happening at once, you know? So, but that's my question.
Well, I mean, a couple things. One is, as a parent, you don't have really as much control as you think.
Right.
I mean, your kids are in control and you're in the stands. And basically, your kid is going to do what your kid's going to do, and you can't make your kid like hockey.
Right.
The most important thing, if a player is good or bad, is whether or not they like to play. You know, so like our older son was a pretty good hockey player. He just didn't like it that much. There's nothing you could do about that. I mean,
right. And there's nothing wrong with that. Right.
Yeah, I thought that for a little while, and then I realized this is stupid. My realization was, he's pretending he likes it because he loves me, and I'm pretending to believe he likes it because I love him. So we're living a lie and waking up at 5 a.m. because of that lie. And he's just got to go find the thing that he likes, and that's not up to me. That's like wired in his brain, or I don't know the reason. So that's a big thing that I learned. As far as what he learned is, I think he learned actually how to lose. I mean, you're talking about losing. Right. Like, losing is a great thing. It's one of the most important things of hockey, because you learn that you don't really learn anything from winning. You learn from losing. You learn, you know, about how to deal with it, how to accept it, how to not be defeated by it, how to come back from it, how to recover from it, and how to be graceful when you do it.
Right.
And that's a thing you take through your whole life. And that's one of the great things about, I always thought about hockey as a kid, as a parent, as an NHL fan, as a college hockey fan, when they line up at the end of the game and they shake hands, which is to say that we had all this going on the ice and it just ended. It's over. Right. Now the game is over and we go on with the rest of our lives, and that stays there. And that's just such a great thing about hockey. And I always felt that when you dealt with former hockey players, you kind of usually dealt with better people, kind of, because they knew that there was like an on the ice and off the ice thing that went on. Right. And that applies to every field of competition that we face. And that's some of the thing that's, I think, coarsening society, which is people can't separate what these things are, you know, and it's like just a game. But again, my father said, but everything's just a game. You know, if you approach life like a game, you'll have a better life, and you won't be so invested in a particular outcome. And I always say, you want what's best for your kid. We all agree to that, but you don't know what that is. I mean, the best thing for your kid could be losing this game.
It's funny, you know, in a timely way, you know, just recently, the Tom Brady beat Drew Brees, you know, and all the footage is not the game today. It's them out in the field with their kids, with their family, tossing balls, saying, hey, good luck next year, giving a hug, and great competition. I love the fact that we beat each other up, and now I'm moving on, and hopefully you're still playing next year. And as fans, right, there's going to be people that say, how could they even you know, talk to each other? This is blasphemy. They should, you know, I forbid both of them. And the reality is, you know, we're all in this together, and there has to be a time where we can separate the game from personalities and life and move on. I think, you know, one of the quotes that I love, you know, reading your book too, was the one when we were talking to your son, and Coach Pete was having a debate with you about, I think, caring, right? And so Coach Pete said, let me ask you this. Coach Pete said, is Mika happy? You say yes. Is Mika having fun? Yes. You know, so and I can almost see you in the lobby going, yes, he's having fun. Fine. You know, and so why do you care so much, right? And then your son, after all this exchange, is, you know, hey, listen, no matter where they put me, it's still hockey. This is what I love to do. I love being out here. So the fact that he, after all of this, right, and all the things you have going on in the book from top to bottom, he loves being there. There's a certain aspect of that really, you know, at least brought me back a little bit. Like, okay, the kid's not like saying, done, I just want to play Xbox and never go to a rink again. That's my fear, right? As a hockey developer,
right?
We at that 13, 14-year-old group, when your son can really have an impact, right? Can just say, you know, with your 5-year-old, they're like, I'm not going to hockey. Well, you're getting in the car, get dressed, I'm making you, you know, you're going, you know, so got to push a little bit, right? But that I like the fact that, you know, there's that hope in there. That, listen, you know, and I'm trying to read it like, are you realizing, oh, okay, well, he loves hockey, but then you kind of go back but I still don't understand why you're not mad, you know? And I think that's
because I get so angry and caught up about things, and I was like that as a kid too, and it probably limited my hockey career because I burned myself out. I'd go nuts about the indignity, you know? And then there was the issue of getting hit all the time because I was kind of small, and so it's not so much an issue, and you realize this is all me. He doesn't care, man. He likes all his coaches. He doesn't care. I mean, he thinks this one's a little nuts. He likes this one better, but he doesn't, to him, it's just, he loves playing hockey and being on the team. And that's all that it's really about. So, and it's kind of like, I can't ruin that. I spoke to a friend that I grew up playing hockey with, and he was talking about playing adult hockey and how it's so great because he immediately feels like he's 5 years old again when he starts playing, and it never gets bad. And it is, hockey's kind of like pizza or chocolate cake. You can't really ruin it. You know, we're just trying to like work on making the experience, like even to realize what's happening as it's happening, like you were saying, as opposed to, you know, focusing on, well, where does this put us in the algorithm? I think that algorithm has done a lot of damage, actually. Where's it going to put us in the algorithm? Where's it going to put us in the standings? What are blah, 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 blah. When to the kids, none of that really matters. Like, you know, even this year, you realize if they play a scrimmage, that to them is a game. They can't exactly. They just get into the game itself, and it's as fun as anything.
Yeah, I think we're seeing through this pandemic too that so many people. I mean, look at the outcropping of outdoor rinks and pond hockey and freedom, right? That kids would never have gotten without this experience. You can say all you want about the bad things. Oh, there's no games, there's no officials, there's no my hockey rankings. But the fact is, there's probably more kids loving the sport today because of the freedom they're getting. Yeah. And mom and dad, not like I haven't seen yet. Now maybe I may see this as February rolls into play. I haven't seen a coach with the whistle on a pond. Yeah. Right. So that's a good thing, but this is going to happen, right?
This year's been good for my son. I feel like because it is so much more casual. First of all, they can't play as many games, so they're splitting up. So they're all on the ice all the time. It's like pond hockey. They let him play every position. You know, he can play defense, never play defense, can play goalie if he feels like playing goalie. And in that way, he gets a better sense of what the goalie's up against, you know, gets a better sense of what the defenseman has to do. And all that I think has been, you know, weirdly good. I think when I was, again, growing up, it was much colder. It really was.
Yeah, right.
And in where I grew up outside Chicago, we had a huge park in our town, and they'd freeze over the entire park, and you could have like 10 games going on simultaneously. And you just go there Saturday, Sunday, play for 8 or 9 hours of just no coaches, just kids picking teams and playing. And that's what really made you good, is being on the ice all that time. And now that it's not really as possible now, because there's so much more competition for ice time and it's, you can't, you know, we have a pond down here that hasn't frozen yet because it keeps getting warm again. Yeah. So it's almost like you need the practices, you know, this as a coach more than me, it's like the practices need to be almost more efficient because you have less ice time ultimately.
Yeah.
All right. So it's been better for you.
Yeah.
Right. Too. How about?
Well, it's been better for me in that I don't have to wake up at 4 a.m.
After writing this book, I'm just curious, what have you heard from other hockey parents? And now that you're watching your son play again, do you have a different perspective? Is that beast inside of you all calmed down now?
Okay, so mostly I've heard from other hockey parents great things, including kids he played with, you know, like basically one of the good things about a book about reading is it names something you felt but never said out loud or never put into words or never worked to get down right. So, and that's satisfying because I wanted to create kind of a Zaggett's guide for the hockey parent, you know, through real experience, not through, you know, it never works out that everything's good. So if you ever read a book that everything's good, that's just not the truth. And when you write a book, it's like, you know, another competitive sport. When you get into it, you want to tell the truth of what really happened. So I've heard from hockey parents all over the country. There's their own stories and what they love and their problems and all that. So that's been really great. And I assumed that part of this is that I would have changed, that I would have more distance. And I went to one of his only games this year, and I noticed he was sitting on the bench an awful lot, and I felt it, man. And I'm like, and I think it's a part of the brain. I think the neurologists are going to discover there's called a hockey cortex. It's right back here. And it's dormant most of the time. But when you watch your kid play hockey, you know, I mean, the weird thing is, like, when you watch, I wrote a book about the 85 Chicago Bears. I got to know all those guys. I wrote a book about the Cubs that won the World Series. And you care so much. I mean, when the Cubs lost the playoffs in 1984, I went outside my house and I cried. But it's nothing like the intensity of watching your kid. And I guess it's just a biological thing, and it's a primal thing, and it just, there's no way to get over it.
Yeah, well, Rich, it's love. I mean, it's the love for your child, right?
Exactly.
Right. No, I mean, that's what it is, right? Like, it's and again, for those of listeners who might not have kids, most of you probably do, but like that starts pretty shortly, if not at birth, right? I always tell my friends, you know, I've had friends try to ask me to describe what it's like to be a dad, and it's not describable, obviously, but I said, you know, I'm a writer too. Let me try. I said, it's like you have another sense in your body outside smell and taste that doesn't activate till the kid's born. Right. And then you have this sixth sense, and it brings a lot of joy and it brings a lot of pain, you know, like, so
somebody famous said, I forget who they said that it's having a kid is like having your heart move to the outside of your chest.
There you go. Yeah.
You're just very vulnerable to things you've tried not to be vulnerable to, you know, their things become your things. And, you know, it's you're not prepared for it. You don't think it's going to happen, but then it does.
Right. And we only have about 6-7 minutes left. So I do want to turn the show now towards more of a solution based topic, but, you know, I want to say this, you know, it's funny. Speaking about this is a perfect transition. You know, there was I can't remember who did it on TV, but they had asked all these parents, if you could have dinner with any 3 people, who would it be? Right. And a lot of famous people, actors and celebrities and athletes, Wayne Gretzky. Right. Then they asked their kids, if you could have dinner with any 3 people, who would it be? And almost every kid, well, mommy and daddy, you know, and my brother. And it was funny for the parents to have to watch that back, because they did a lot of those, like, oh, you know, like, but, you know, it just shows you that, you know, as we grow older, we forget sometimes what it's like to be a kid. In my house, we have this wooden plaque, and it says, don't grow up, it's a trap. Right. And I've always kind of lived by that. If I have to try my best to remember, even though it's hard, what was it like to be 7? What did I really care about when I was 7? Because it wasn't, you know, winning the championship and going to the NHL so much. It might have been, hey, I want to play in the NHL, but, you know, we don't think about those things. So I think, you know, when we look at the hockey culture, it's really more than just hockey culture. It's culture. Let's just be honest, right? It's American culture right now, where we can't seem to have a disagreement and communicate that with each other anymore. You know, everybody's, as you said, trying this FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. You know, I'll start the conversation off with this, that I'm a geek, if you can't tell from the stuff behind me, right? I'm big into the geek culture. And there's this great quote in Spider-Man, great quote, where Spider-Man says to someone aspiring to be a hero, he goes, look, it's not about saving the world. It's It's about just saving one person, right? And then doing it again and again and again. And I think as a parent, not that I need to save my kids, but I focus on my kids. That's my job, right? In this entire society is to make my kids a productive member of the society. And then I dive into, what does that mean? Does that mean making him an NHL all-star?
Right.
Well, if that happens, that's wonderful. Don't get me wrong. Right. And if he's got talent, I'll help him develop that. But no, I want him just to be a good functioning human being that wants to pursue his dreams or my daughter's dreams, whatever they may be, in a way that they can use their effort, they can understand how to do that and become a productive member of society with whatever it is that they want to do. Right. I think we as parents get lost in what we think they need to be, or worse, what we wanted to be as children. I wanted to play in the NHL. I really did. Right. But I always say that might not be my son's dream. Right. And I got to recognize that. So I'm just jumping into the conversation with that. Rich, I'm going to go to you right away. What are some of the solutions? And again, knowing that you have a hard time battling this. And by the way, real quick, I do appreciate how vulnerable you make yourself in your writing. I think that's a key. A lot of writers don't do that. They want to hide that stuff. That's what makes it so good. Right. So what have you learned, even though you're saying you're still dealing with this? What do you think the solutions are? Again, not that there's one thing that's going to be an answer for the whole world.
Well, I've been thinking about hockey solutions, like nuts and bolts solutions to make it a little better. And I only have a couple that I've come up with. One is, I don't think parents should go to every game. I think they should say, I'm only going to go to half the games or whatever, partly because it'll be good for you. And I learned this unwillingly at the orders of my wife, by the way, but one, it'll be good for you.
The orders, I love
for
it.
Your kid to not be performing for you, to be, doing the game without you. And it's good for the coach that you're not there. It's just good for you not to be there all the time. And so that's one thing. And then, the whole thing is for just the one thing that has bothered me is these kind of like the way, because I wrote the story for Harper's Magazine about the NFL Combine. And I went right from the NFL Combine, where I was a reporter, to the Pee Wee tryouts. It just happened that way. And it was hard not to see the Pee Wee tryouts as a miniature version of the NFL Combine, and all these things that kids are judged on are important, but the really important things are all the intangibles that you can never get in a tryout. So I would think that the tryouts could be a little different, where it's a little less on categories and a little more on the coaches. Like, let the coaches almost pick their teams, right? With exceptions, because the coaches generally know, and realize that a tryout is just a snapshot in time, that people develop at different rates and they develop by spurts and all this stuff. And you can't really tell who's going to be good. And it's not always the most important thing. And I will say one thing I left out about one of the most important things that my son learned through hockey, and I learned through watching him, is, and it's as true as a writer, actually, which is, it's important to like sort of sublimate some of your talent for the good of the team, Right. And everybody wants to give everything they have and put it all out there every time. But for the whole thing to work, you got to like pull in the edges and sublimate the whole thing. And a lot of that goes into the players that can do that can turn out to be the really great teammates, So I don't know, there's probably no objective way to look for it, but I think it starts with the whole Malcolm Gladwell Moneyball, the idea that you can put a number on everything and then give the person a number and then judge that way, which maybe let Billy Beane build the Oakland A's for very cheap. But the fact is that there's a lot of things you can't put a number on. And it's like, if you can't put a number on, it's like they don't exist, but some of them are the most important things at all. So I don't know if that's an answer to the question or not, but.
No, sure. You're talking about character. You're talking about character.
Yeah, I'm talking about character.
Right. It's not something that you can put a number to.
And you see it, like I always say, like you don't see in the tryouts who the best players. You see when you're in a 5-game tournament and it's game 4 and you're losing by 5 goals, right. Which kids are going to, we had, when he was a squirt, they were down by like 5 goals and it was the 3rd period. And this one little kid, I just heard him, he goes, we can do this, guys. All we got to do is get 3 goals and then 3 goals. And I'm like, this kid's nuts. I love this kid. And that kid went out, he's this little kid and he scored like 3 goals in the first 5 minutes. And he did not make any top teams because he didn't have an outside edge or something. Right. You know what I mean? But that was the kid that sort of carried the team. And I met this guy while working on my Bears book named Doug Plank, who's the guy who gave the number 46 defense its name. He's one of the greatest guys I've ever met. And he was talking about football. He's a football coach too. And he said, basically he watches tape, and if he can turn on a tape and not tell by how the player's playing, whether they're ahead by 20 or down by 20, they play the same either way. That's who he wants on his team.
Right. And the best teams do that all the time.
Yeah.
You know, going back to that kid real quick, you talked about this, says we can do it. You know, one thing I would express to parents out there is how often do we lose that as adults? And again, a lot of that comes through experience. A lot of it comes through, you know, going through life, getting beat up by life. But I admire that kid. You can learn from that kid. He believes, and then he did it.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show you how often we forget. Sometimes just a little belief, even as an adult, can go a long way. Christie, Mike, we have just a couple minutes left. I want to make sure I open the floor up if you had any follow-up questions or comments.
This is a great conversation. We really appreciate that you could join us. And you're right. You know, hockey does demand a certain toughness from our players, but we got to remember our little gladiators out there are kids. Let's not forget that. And when we're in the stands as parents, we have to learn some self-control techniques. And I think you pointed this one out too, counting down from 10.
Yeah.
Right? You want to talk a little bit more about that?
It's interesting because when I started to get really into this, I started looking around the stands of the parents. I could see some of them yelling, some of them, and then I saw all the rest people had developed techniques, you know, that I was like, I saw a guy like he's carefully keeping score, like he's in the box score at a Cubs game, you know, and that's the way he sort of controlled his temper, you know. And then you see parents that would bring a cooler full of beer, you know, or whatever it was, whatever the different, and then you see the parents, like, I always love, like, I'm always the kind of guy that if the game's going badly, I think if I move to a different place in the rink, things will change or look different, you know, like, so I'm always like moving around. I'm like a hockey rink migrant. I'm moving from, like, I'm up here, I'm down here, I'm over here. And I always notice, like, the goalie's parents always are behind the goalie. So it's like doing this, you know, cycles of the moon or whatever. The faces of the team, like, oh, we're in the first period, second period, third period, you know, follow the goalie's parents. And then there are the people who will only watch. So it's people who have to watch alone because they know they're just going to be muttering and cursing to themselves the entire time. And they let their internal monologue be externalized as long as no one else can hear them, you know?
Yeah. Someone should write a book about this. It's crazy.
But it's wild. Just as like a student of human nature, I remember like talking to a guy and we were just probably saying stuff we shouldn't say, you know, we're by ourselves, friends. And another parent comes and he had a GoPro like up above us filming the game. And he went to take it down. We were like, oh crap, you know?
Yeah,
turned out didn't have any sound. It was
that's the world of live barn now too, right? Where's the live barn cameras? On a bench?
Or you'll be recording with your phone, your kid's about to score, and then the parent next to you says, are you recording? Are you recording?
Right.
Everybody be quiet. We're gonna be on everyone's silent.
You know, and I
record the whole game, and then everyone would be quiet.
And I'll say, you know, I certainly, you know, reading your book, Rich. I mean, I would say that like, I had like, you know, little experiences there, but I think, you know, one of the things you mentioned earlier was just like, what are solutions and what can parents do? And I know, like for me, like those aren't my experiences, right? So I think there's so, like to your point about the parents saying there's a lot of things that they saw in your book that they experienced. There's a lot of good there too. And I think like for me, like I've always found like in my company, Mike Benelli Hockey Solutions, the whole idea behind it was, you know, how do I take like people like Lee, who's written a book on winning, you know, and how team culture is built. How do I take that and incorporate that into, you know, my education of the coaches that I work with and the organizations I work with? Because I think there are so many good answers out there that combat the negativity, you know, and again, I appreciate the book. And I appreciate reading it and then reflecting on it. But then I also look at it and say, wow, I almost feel bad because of the experience you and the parents had on this team, because there are so many great programs that are doing the right thing and creating the right experiences. And I think more of us need to maybe we need to be more vocal about that and more, you know, send that out more, that there are better solutions. You know, one of the things you talked about a little bit, and I know we're going over a little bit here, but, you know, just that maybe the coaches aren't equipped and what can we do? You know, I work with USA Hockey, obviously, on coaching education, and maybe we got to get away from the X's and O's and more about psychology and more about, you know, culture and more about, you know, how do we treat each other better, and then hope that the 2 hours a week that we have our parents and kids, that we could actually influence that a little bit, right?
Right.
To your point, you know, I just joked around with my son last night. He was doing like a cooking project or something. And he's like, well, I don't want to take a picture of it in case it doesn't come out good. I go, well, you won't post that on Instagram unless it is good. So don't worry about it. We're not going to post that it was bad. right? So I think that's the same idea from the
Yeah.
hockey parent. I never hear, oh, we lost to that team last night. We got killed and my son played horrible. I never see that. and I'm waiting for somebody to say, we went to tryouts and we got cut. But
Right.
hey, we're going to give it a go again. We only
Right.
hear, hey, my son made the team or my daughter made the team. So I think that falls on a lot of us as educators and solutions people in sports, and specifically in this case in hockey, to seek out these programs and these coaches and these volunteers.
Yeah, they do exist.
And give them the tools to make it better.
Yeah. And I mean, I would like to say that the experience my son's had is on balance, and it's not even close, very, very positive. And even this season, I write about in the book for the highs and the lows and things didn't go right. He had a great time. Yeah. And he had a great season, and it was a big part of his life. We've all had good seasons and bad seasons, and we take away from both of them. And sometimes when you're older, the bad seasons are what you remember, and those times when you're with your friends is what you remember. So it's all good. And I do think hockey is the greatest sport, and he said, play it and he will play it in one form or another for the rest of his life, probably, in adult league with me, father, son, adult league, so, and as far as the parents go, I mean, one thing I think that coaches could take from this book, younger coaches, especially who don't have kids, is like, for the parents, it's a very emotional experience. And that's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with people in an emotionally exposed moment,
right?
Even though they might not look it, even though they're probably 20 years older than a lot of the coaches. And basically the best thing coaches could do is just explain what's going on,
right?
And the way that a lot of coaches would deal with if I was 25 is like, I just want to get out of here. Like, I don't want to deal with these parents who are waiting for me to yell at me for not putting blah, 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 or da, 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 da. Like, and then they end up having a few parents around them who are sort of the in parents, and that's who's around the coach. And it becomes this whole thing. I would just, if you just explain, like, this is what we're doing,
communicate.
This is good for your kid. Like, even when the coach in the book says he's having a good time, isn't he? It was so smart of him, because he knew my kid and he knew he was having a great time, and my kid didn't care about his playing time or care about any of that. He was just like to be playing. It sort of made me look at myself and say, what is wrong with me? He's 100% right. He's the 25-year-old kid and I'm supposed to be the older person here, and he's right and I'm wrong, and all it took was 2 minutes, 3 minutes of his time just explaining to me the bigger picture and causing me to step back. And I think that, like you said, when you have kids, it's totally different.
Right.
And until you have kids, you don't really understand what these parents are going through, like, in their minds.
Right.
And it's good to just be open and just talk to them.
Right.
I think that's a great way to end the episode. Rich, I really appreciate you giving us a few extra minutes and for coming on the show. You've been all around promoting this book, and we really appreciate you coming on here. So just for the listeners at home, Pee-wee Confessions of a Hockey Parent, you can get it wherever books are sold, Amazon, online. If you can get yourself to a bookstore, see if they have it there. Rich Cohen, thank you so much for coming on Our Kids Play Hockey. We'll also put a link to the book, obviously, on the webpage when this comes out. For Christie Casciano Burns, for Mike Benelli, I'm Lee Elias. Thanks so much for listening to this edition of Our Kids Play Hockey. We'll see you on the next episode. Have a great day, everyone.